A historically bleak revenue forecast, executive orders aimed at health and wellness, plus the property tax debate is over, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending April 18th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
This week, all options are on the table for the state budget, as lawmakers will have $2 billion less to spend than previously expected. The state revenue forecast unveiled Wednesday is the worst since at least the Great Recession. National economic uncertainty is driving the sharp decline in projected tax revenue, $2.4 billion less over a 3-year period than what was expected just 4 months ago. Senate budget architect Ryan Mishler says these numbers scare him a lot more than during the Great Recession.
Back then, if you remember, we had federal money to backfill it. We don't have any federal money to backfill it. This is all on us.
Lawmakers say all options are on the table, from budget cuts to increasing some taxes like those on cigarettes or alcohol. Democratic Representative Greg Porter says K-12 education should be spared from the chopping block.
We don't have a good education system, et cetera. People are not going to come here and live. We have to create a pipeline of development.
Lawmakers intend to finalize the budget within the next 2 weeks. How alarming is this revenue forecast? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith, back in the saddle this week to talk about such good news. Ann DeLaney, how bad is this forecast?
Oh, it's pretty bad. We're not talking about a rounding error here. We're talking about a substantial difference. And the Republicans who have controlled this entire state for so many years have been completely irresponsible fiscally. I mean, they have. We have this voucher program that's mushroomed out of control. We have tax cuts that go on for years without regard to these kinds of situations. And it's completely fiscally irresponsible. They have to step up now, and they're going to have to make up that revenue. They're at least going to have to do it until January, but then I'm sure Trump says he's going to have the economy just humming away, like he's going to settle the war in the Gaza, and he's going to settle the war in the Ukraine, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. So it's just a short-term fix that they have to come up with.
That's good news. Lawmakers say everything is on the table. Yeah. I don't think everything is on the table. I think cannabis legalization, which some have floated as a way to generate revenue, that doesn't seem on the table.
Not in the budget bill.
Dramatic gaming expansion, which has been floated as a way to generate revenue, doesn't really seem on the table. But beyond that, is everything on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of this situation is not good. But one of the good things is I think there are more obvious options there. I mean, I am actually thankful that we have the budget writers in power that we do now, because the people that have been praising the reserves have just been on a roll recently. When you have COVID, you had the $1 billion Medicaid shortfall, and now you have this. Thankfully, we continue to have a really nice level of reserves to help address certain issues like this. And when you talk about the options that are there, you know, are you going to pause the income tax restrictions that you see? The cigarette tax, just hearing comments from the different legislative leaders, seems something that's
$2 would generate $800 million. That's
800 million. Like I said, you have the reserves there. So while this is bleak, a lot of it isn't the state's fault. I'll give you that. I think all of the budget forecast folks kept referencing just the uncertainty at the federal level. So while these drastic cuts,
at the federal level, that where all that uncertainty
while these drastic cuts aren't there per se, it's just the uncertainty. Again, wanting to be responsible, making sure that we approach this in a responsible way to make sure that, you know, things that Hoosiers need aren't cut.
Legislative leaders have said, I think the number that House Speaker Todd Huston said when talking about the reserve. So the House budget put the reserve level at something like in the 12% range of the total budget. That's how much would be left in reserves. The Senate budget bumped that up even more in the mid 13% range. Now Todd Huston is talking about taking that down closer to like 10%. Gives you a little more money to spend in the budget while still keeping a healthy reserve. But at the same time, these numbers in the forecast, our projected revenue could get a lot worse in the next few months. So doesn't that conversely almost make you want to pad the reserves a little more?
Well, thank goodness we do have a reserve, and I guess budget architects get credit for that. But let's not forget that it's the supermajorities in both chambers that prevented the surplus from being even bigger than what it is now because of some of the automatic refunds and disbursements that were triggered at certain levels and over the past several budget sessions. There were people who wanted to, rather than return small, all money's important, but what's the average check? I mean, we're talking dollars. Enough for dinner, maybe, for one.
McDonald's.
There you go. I don't do commercials, but I'll defer to you. It's more than that. Around that, or keep the state, flush with resources so it can weather these kinds of storms. So good, yes, that we do have a surplus. Thank goodness we're better off than most every other state in that regard. But too bad, I guess, in a certain extent. Some would say that we don't, because of the various tax cuts and because of all the various refund triggers that were set up in recent budget cycles, we didn't have even more to deal with this sort of crisis.
Obviously, Republicans really don't want to increase taxes. The Senate Republicans more resistant to that than any other caucus in the State House. But at this point, would it be harder to justify the cuts that are going to have to be made no matter what if they don't do anything to generate more revenue?
Yeah, and even, we got this forecast on Wednesday. On Tuesday, Senator Mishler was saying, I don't want to put the cigarette tax increase in until we have the until we have the new forecast, because you don't know. Well, now we know. And so the fact is if Senate Republicans aren't amenable to a cigarette tax increase now, it's just never going to happen. They obviously desperately need the revenue. It statistically reduces smoking and healthcare costs. So
it's not a long-term solution because that money decreases over
absolutely.
time, which is part of the goal of increasing the cigarette tax.
They're going to have to, they're already cutting child care access, lowering the entitlement or eligibility for that. The voucher program that House Republicans run, that's going to be hard. Expanding that to a family that makes $1 million a year while you're cutting, public health funding and SNAP, and those are going to be hard discussions to have.
I mean, that feels a little like the trade, right? House Republicans and Democrats in both chambers, but House Republicans have been on board with increasing the cigarette tax for years. Well, they get that. Maybe they don't get their voucher expansion to true universal vouchers.
But even if you scaled it back to the level it was currently,
that's not going to happen.
No, I don't think they're going to roll it back.
No, but even if you did,
keep it where it is.
Yeah. That's my point. Yeah. That's my point. That alone is would not solve the gap.
No. I mean, that's I think it was like 170 million.
The bigger chunk was last budget cycle when the dramatic change and eligibility was made.
Fiscally irresponsible position of expanding them. Yes.
I would just say, going back to the uncertainty portion of this, though, I think it'll be really interesting to see moving forward how hard the legislature sticks with their whole "we're not messing with the budget" in a non-budget year, because I mean they're just saying that it's uncertainty. The things at the federal level could change next month, 6 months, 8 months.
Today.
So exactly. So I think going forward, seeing how well they stick with that.
I mean, I think that was brought up in a discussion with either Speaker Houston or Senator Bray yesterday, and the question about dipping into the, opening up the budget in the short session, and the answer was very much, we really hate to do that. We've done it in the past for little things. We try not to do it at all. But I think to your point, it'll be interesting to see how much authority or leeway they give the governor to make decisions sort of on his own if federal funding gets cut off in big ways or that sort of thing.
Well, that's the best case scenario if you wait till this short session. If federal funding gets cut off in certain areas or reduced dramatically, say in funding for Medicaid, a special session is much more likely than worrying about whether or not they're going to open the budget in the next session.
As an emergency, which is the reason why the short session even exists in the first place.
True. Okay. All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is, should lawmakers raise some taxes, like those on cigarettes and alcohol, to help avoid some budget cuts? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you whether lawmakers will land on meaningful property tax reform this year. 14% of you said yes, 86% said no. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But if you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, Governor Mike Braun unveiled a new health initiative this week, which makes several significant changes to the state's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, or SNAP, program. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports the top U.S. health official says the changes go further than any other states so far.
Braun signed a series of executive orders introducing changes to SNAP, including an overhaul of the employment and training program, limiting eligibility, and removing candy and soft drinks from SNAP benefits. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says Indiana is the first state to exclude candy. He says the proposed changes have already been submitted to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which also sets Indiana apart.
I also want to take this moment to encourage governors all over the country to follow the lead of Indiana.
Kennedy says Braun's executive orders align with the Trump administration's Make America Healthy Again campaign.
Chris, how does this address health versus just seeming to punish poor people?
Yeah, I don't think we're punishing poor people. I think Governor Braun is refreshingly taking a step back from the whole conversation of what do we fund, who do we fund, where do we fund it, and trying to address what I think everybody has kind of agreed upon, which is what is that main driving cost factor of health services, which is health metrics, right? And I think whenever you have to start trying to nail down to those personal responsibility decisions that Hoosiers would have to have just to live healthier, you have to try to find that balance between how much does the government try to influence those decisions, especially probably more so for a Republican governor, small government guy, but versus also encouraging it. And I think they landed on a good spot here. You're not saying that, people on SNAP can't buy sugary drinks. You're just saying the money that is given to you from the government, you might have to opt, for the orange juice instead of the Mountain Dew. And I think the rest of the executive orders do a really good job of that holistic approach. I mean, you're talking about, the training program from the FSSA, how that's being woefully underperforming. So how do we make sure to get that to try to help the people on SNAP get into all of these jobs that are available? You're talking about the youth physical tests, making sure we're encouraging that from a young age. Indiana's a top 10 state agricultural output, so how do we leverage that of making sure we can get more farm fresh foods to the table? I think, you could nitpick specific parts of it, but as a whole, I think they do a really good job of kind of trying to encompass every aspect of the health.
As we talk on this show and as lawmakers talk all the time about the high healthcare costs in Indiana, the poor health of Indiana, of Hoosiers. Mm-hmm. I almost said Indianans, good Lord. The poor health of Hoosiers is a huge part of why our costs are higher. Right. So does this sort of thing, is this where Indiana government needs to be pointing?
If this is going to do something meaningful, okay, we know we have a problem with obesity, and the obesity drives heart trouble, it drives pulmonary trouble, it drives diabetes, all of the things that feed into the cost of health care. Why don't we, when we're trying to raise revenue, put taxes on candy and soda? Why is it only poor people that shouldn't be having it? Why isn't it everybody in the community? I mean, it would raise an awful lot of money. And if we do take the position already with cigarettes and with alcohol that they are bad for your health, and so we're going to tax them, we have now determined that these are bad for your health. Let's tax them. Okay? Let's raise the revenue. Let's discourage people from using it. And by the way, when we're doing that, the initiative they put in public health, they're going to cut again this year, which is exactly the wrong approach on the part of the legislature.
On the question about the SNAP changes, one of the things that struck me from the coverage of this and hearing what Governor Braun said is the personal responsibility question is sometimes people don't have access to the kind of healthy foods that they should or even want to have. There isn't anything here that seems to me pointing in that direction.
There are whole neighborhoods that don't have a grocery store, and what do you have? You have a convenience store.
And the overlap between the SNAP population and food deserts is
substantial.
Substantial.
Absolutely. And so there's nothing in there for that. And also, let's also remember that these are people who are struggling. It's cheaper to buy junk food than it is to buy fruit or to, buy something else. And I do find it intriguing. I'll be curious how the definitions work out because, I might be addicted to zero sugar Pepsi. My husband drinks this tea that's loaded with sugar. So which one's better? Which one would be allowed? Which one wouldn't?
Yeah.
There's so many inconsistencies when we talk about these things. I mean, you pointed one out a moment ago. Why not? If this is so bad for society and we're so eager as a state to become healthier and reduce our overall costs, why not tax it? Another inconsistency certainly would be weight loss medications, which a little local company based not right down the street went up 16% just yesterday in a single day.
Yeah.
Not that I'm watching that closely. But yeah, Lilly and other makers of weight loss medications, which is now shown to be tremendously effective in controlling blood pressure, blood sugar levels, and other sorts of things.
And even curing diabetes.
And curing diabetes at a time when you see the federal government rolling back and constricting coverage for those things in terms of taking them off the lists of medications for which people who don't have the means through private insurance or self-pay to obtain those. Yeah. So if you're serious, I guess, about dealing with the problem, you talk about the pound of prevention, you know, the penny of prevention, the pound of cure. Well, it seems to me there is an example if you want to be consistent, because we're kind of picking and choosing right now, it seems.
Right.
And hey, we could help close that budget shortfall by raising the tax on candy and soda, I suppose.
Hey, you know, I mean.
All right, the Senate gave its final stamp of approval to a major property tax reform package this week, sending the measure to the governor, who signed it into law hours later. The headline from Republican Senator Travis Holdman: property tax relief for most homeowners.
2/3 of homeowners in 2026 will receive a bill less than they received in 2025.
Beginning next year, homeowners will receive a credit on their property tax bill of 10% of the bill, up to $300. Those aged 65 and older and disabled veterans would receive additional credits of $150 and $250 respectively. The measure is expected to cost local governments up to $1.8 billion over just the next 3 years. Republicans' answer to that is new local income tax options. But Democratic Senator Greg Taylor says local officials aren't going to raise income taxes.
You mark my words, you're going to cut services. You think we got road problems? You think we got access to government service problems here? Just wait.
In a statement, Governor Mike Braun called the bill historic property tax relief that makes the system fairer, more transparent, and easier to understand. Niki, we hear about the number of homeowners who will see lower bills, and I suppose at this point, just not the bill just not going up will matter to a lot of people. Will this satisfy enough Hoosiers to make it worth it?
Well, it depends who you're talking about. Will it satisfy the extremely vocal segment who, let's be honest, they want to get rid of property taxes altogether? It's never going to satisfy them. I think it's a significant amount. I think we overuse the word historic. I've certainly been here when we gave larger percentage increases when we've redone property tax systems before.
You've been
such
through
as the 1,
like
2, 3.
2 or 3 of these, right?
Several of them. So, you know, it is going to help some people. It really is. Now, whether it's going to conversely increase income taxes, I think we'll have to wait and see, because those are very hard decisions to make. As we can see with the state budget, they don't want to vote for a tax increase. So.
They don't want to vote for a cigarette tax increase,
Right,
which the
that's what I
polling
mean.
tells you is the one that people are okay with.
So we'll see if locals actually end up going there or not. But that is a legit fear.
John, to Greg Taylor's point, are local officials going to go out and raise taxes on Hoosiers?
There will be a reluctance. I mean, the message is clear. It doesn't matter where you are in the state, what part, where county where you reside, which party you affiliate with. People recognize that people don't like to pay taxes. They don't want to see a tax increase. And there will be a reluctance. Now, will the need, the absolute need for police services, for school funding, I mean, these are all different entities that would make these decisions. It's not as if one entity in every county will make these decisions. But when push comes to shove, the question is, will the calls and the emails and the visits to government offices about, hey, the bottom of my car's here, but the suspension of my car is backed up the street in that pothole, or other sorts of things, when do those complaints offset the concern about tax increases? And so this may take several, I don't know that we'll really, and I know it's cliche to say time will tell, but we won't really know how this plays out for this biennium, probably. This is a longer-term issue.
The local income tax stuff doesn't really go until 2028. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, was a lot of this bill really about state lawmakers wanting to shift the pressure onto local lawmakers?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it since the beginning. I think that it really does come down to who wants to be the boogeyman, who wants to be the bad guy. And this allows state lawmakers to, with a straight face, say, we offered you guys relief on our end that we did. And then we also did cap, the amount that local income taxes can rise. But I don't agree with Senator Taylor on much. But I think he had a good point of, if you're the Republican Party and you own 70% of the state or the local governments, the head of them around the state, that first election after some of these local income taxes either go up or some people will get taxed for the first time with local income taxes, how will that impact the statewide races or at that local government level will be interesting to see.
Or if they don't go up, if local officials don't raise taxes and instead cut services, where does the blame fall?
Well, I think it depends on who's speaking. The locals are going to blame the legislature. The legislature is going to say you had an option. Frankly,
so who
we're
will
never
voters
going to.
blame?
Well, that remains whoever's message is more effective.
And I suppose whoever's at the ballot box first.
That's first, probably. But you're never going to have any meaningful. I mean, this is not historic. All right, 300 makes a difference for 3 years to some people, but it's more relevant in 1825 than 2025. $300 a year. But you're never going to have meaningful property tax reform when you have 2,300 units of government in this state who can raise revenue. I mean, it's crazy. And when you see Diego and Beckwith going and buying $90,000 cars, you have 1,000 trustees out there. Are they provided transportation too? You have Randolph County that has what, 1,000? 2,000, 3,000 students, and they have 5 school districts? I mean, it is absolutely crazy. You're going to have to deal with that if you're ever going to have meaningful property tax reform.
In some cases have the reserves that
will be
millions
tapped, of dollars in reserves.
So they will be giving at the office as well, probably.
Lawmakers had a really difficult time crafting the property tax bill. The only thing I can think of that would be harder is forcing local government consolidation at the State House.
Well, you know what? It needs to be done.
All right, the ACLU of Indiana sued the Trump administration this week for revoking visas of 7 international students studying at universities in Indiana. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Zach Castle reports 2 of the students are on track to graduate in May, and according to the ACLU, all plaintiffs are in good standing with their schools.
The lawsuit alleges that the Trump administration violated the Fifth Amendment due process rights of the international students when it canceled their student visas. The students study at Purdue, Notre Dame, and Indiana University, Indianapolis. They're citizens of China and Nigeria. The lawsuit asks the court to reinstate the students' visas and issue a temporary restraining order to prevent them from being detained. Almost 1,200 students at more than 180 schools across the country have recently lost visas, according to the news site Inside Higher Ed. ACLU chapters in Michigan, Montana, and New Hampshire have also filed lawsuits contesting the visa revocations.
John Schwantes, if you were an international student, why would you want to study in the U.S. right now?
Well, I presume why these people came several years ago, because at that point, as it had been for a century or more, this is the beacon for higher education. The American higher education system is the envy of the world. It just has been. Let's stipulate that.
Yeah, full stop.
And the other thing, you look at a lot of the international students who come here, not only do they acquire the skills, but they acquire the relationships. Even if they move back, they're able to engage in a global commerce and the global exchange of ideas and scientific research, or stay here, which certainly benefits many of our communities.
Like the Purdue president.
Fast forward to now. Why would you do it now?
Yeah.
I'll pass to somebody else. It's still probably better, even at its worst, it's probably better than a lot of places.
Well, tell that to somebody who wanted to graduate in May.
It's worth noting the temporary restraining order that the ACLU of Indiana requested was denied by a judge yesterday, so the ACLU will determine what its next steps are. But Niki, I mean, this extends even further to things like we've seen international travel into the United States plummet in recent weeks. Yeah. We've seen road travel from Canada into the U.S. plummet in recent weeks. Is Indiana and the United States about to have a tourism problem?
Yeah, maybe. It just depends. We're seeing this big fight, go on. There was an issue in Florida just yesterday with someone who was just going in and out of the state for work, and They were born there. They had a birth certificate, and they were arrested and put in jail for almost a whole day before they got let go. And so this is about way more than just students. And so we're seeing it play out in every segment of society.
It's about the rule of law, which is something that Donald Trump doesn't believe in. We either have due process under this system, which is what has been the hallmark of our democracy since its inception, or we have a totalitarian state, which is what he's doing. He thinks he can unilaterally take issue with anybody that he doesn't like and then summarily deport them or revoke their visa or prevent them from entering government buildings. I mean, how long did it take Hitler to consolidate power? Okay? He's in almost to his 100th day. You can laugh all you want, but he is disregarding the court orders. He has no sense of the separation of powers, and he has no respect for the rule of law. And that's going to come to a real head. I don't think the Supreme Court has the...
You talk about uncertainty, and I think this is another area where there's a lot of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
That's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.